Espresso is not a bean. It's not a roast. Most people assume it's some special dark variety grown somewhere specific, but it's not. It's a method. You take any coffee bean, grind it fine, pack it tight, and force hot water through it at high pressure in about 25 seconds. That's it. That's espresso. The result is small, intense, and concentrated in a way that drip coffee never gets close to. Records suggest Italian cafes in the early 1900s pioneered this pressure-based approach, and it spread first through Italian communities moving across Europe, then through the specialty coffee wave that hit North America decades later. Today, it's the base of nearly every drink on any cafe menu you've ever looked at. Every latte, every cappuccino, every flat white, all of them start here. The next one has a name most people have been mispronouncing their entire lives, cappuccino. And the twist is that it's named after monks, specifically the Capuchin order whose brown robes match almost exactly the color of the drink when espresso and milk come together. That color match is the whole point of the name. The drink is wearing a costume. Some accounts say the style was first developed in Vienna. Others say Italian cafes refined it into what we recognize now. But either way, the post-World War II cafe boom pushed it across Europe and eventually into every coffee chain in existence. The ratio matters here. Equal thirds, espresso, steamed milk, foam, change the ratio and it becomes something else entirely. It's often the first fancy coffee someone orders when they're graduating from plain drip. And in much of Europe, it's still the most common cafe order in the morning. The next one sounds similar, but is actually a completely different drink, and the confusion between them never ends. Here's the part that gets people. In Italy, if you walk into a cafe and just say a latte, they'll hand you a glass of plain milk, because latte means milk, just milk. The coffee word got dropped somewhere in the American translation, and now the whole world uses a half word. The full thing is cafe latte, coffee milk, and it arrived in its oversized flavored syrup form through American chains in the 80s and 90s who took the idea and stretched it into something barely recognizable from the original. The espresso almost disappears in it. The milk dominates. It's smooth and mild and pale, and every seasonal drink, pumpkin spice, vanilla, caramel, is built on this exact template. Here's where most people stop thinking about coffee, even though this next one is the one they drink most. Filter coffee, drip coffee, the plain brown pot on the counter. It is, by most counts, the most consumed coffee on earth, and nobody talks about it like it's interesting. But the story behind it actually is. Records suggest the paper filter was invented in Germany in the early 1900s. Some sources say Melita Bentz created it using her son's notebook paper, which is either charming or bizarre depending on how you look at it. Electric drip machines turned it into a household standard across North America and Northern Europe by the mid-20th century, and now it lives in offices and diners and kitchens everywhere. Unremarkable and completely dominant, gravity does the work. Hot water drips through grounds held in a filter slowly, over 4 to 6 minutes. That's the whole machine. The next one flips this completely. Cold brew is never heated, not once, not even a little. And that distinction matters more than it sounds, because cold brew and iced coffee are not the same drink. Iced coffee is just brewed hot and then cooled down, which changes the chemistry. Cold brew is coffee grounds steeped in cold or room temperature water for somewhere between 12 and 24 hours. The long, slow extraction naturally pulls out less acid and more of the sweeter compounds, so the result tastes different. Not just colder, actually different. Some accounts trace cold steeping to Japan, where a slow drip style developed over time. Others point to Dutch traders in the 1600s using cold extraction to transport coffee on long sea voyages without it going bad. By the 2010s, it was everywhere in Western specialty coffee, and then canned versions hit convenience stores globally, and it never slowed down. Here's where history gets genuinely dramatic. Turkish coffee is tied to one culture so completely that banning it once caused riots. In the Ottoman Empire, coffee houses became the place where people gathered, talked, argued, and organized, and some rulers found that threatening enough to try shutting them down. It didn't work. The drink survived every attempt to suppress it. What makes it distinct is that it's never strained. You drink the grounds. Ultrafine coffee is simmered, not boiled, in a small brass or copper pot called a sezve, poured directly into the cup, and the thick layer of grounds that settles at the bottom is part of the experience. The foam on top when poured is considered a mark of skill. Brewing it well is something people take seriously. Today, it's a UNESCO-listed cultural practice in Turkey, still made the same way across the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. Now here's a left turn. Dalgona coffee went viral in 2020 during lockdowns all over TikTok and Instagram. This cloud of whipped foam floating on cold milk. And it looked new, but it wasn't. Many sources link the recipe to a South Asian home tradition called beaten coffee. Instant coffee, sugar, and hot water whipped by hand until it becomes a stiff foam that people across India and Pakistan had been making for decades before it ever appeared on social media. The name Dalgona came from a Korean candy it resembles in color. The recipe was the same. The internet just noticed it late. It's still on cafe menus in South Korea and parts of Southeast Asia, and it carries this strange double identity: ancient home recipe and pandemic-era viral moment at the same time. Next is one of the oldest, and it's where coffee actually begins: Ethiopia, specifically the Kaffa region. There's a piece of folklore, probably the most repeated origin story in coffee, about a goat herder named Kaldi who supposedly noticed his goats acting unusually energetic after eating red berries from a certain tree. Whether or not it happened, the region is real, and the connection between Ethiopia and coffee is not legend. It's documented history. From Ethiopia, coffee moved to Yemen, then spread through the Arab world, then reached Europe through trade. The Ethiopian coffee ceremony, called buna, involves roasting green beans fresh in a pan over fire, grinding them by hand, and brewing in a clay pot called a jabina. The ritual has 3 rounds of pouring, each with its own name and meaning. Rushing it is considered disrespectful. Ethiopian coffee is now a global specialty export, and the ceremony still happens daily across millions of homes. Now the price gets serious. Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee is one of the most expensive in the world, and the reason isn't scarcity of the plant, it's geography and rules. The certified growing zone is tiny, it's a narrow band of altitude in the Blue Mountains, and what can legally be called Blue Mountain coffee is strictly controlled. Records suggest coffee arrived in Jamaica in the 1720s through French and Caribbean trade routes. The part that surprises most people is that Japan purchases an outsized portion of the certified crop each year. It became a luxury status drink in Japanese coffee culture specifically. The beans are still shipped in wooden barrels, which is unusual enough to mention. Described as unusually smooth and mild for the price, it's a coffee that costs a lot, partly because it costs a lot to be allowed to call it that. But the next one is even more expensive, and the reason will make you pause. Kopi luwak, a small animal called the Asian palm civet, eats ripe coffee cherries, digests the fruit around the bean, and the beans pass through its system and are collected from the droppings, washed, roasted, and brewed. Records suggest this practice started with Dutch colonial-era workers in Indonesia, who were forbidden from picking coffee for themselves and found another way. Western media attention, including a reference in a famous film, turned it into a global curiosity, and the price followed the hype. Many sources say the digestion process changes the bean's proteins and reduces bitterness. The ethical questions around farmed versus wild civet sourcing are now significant and shouldn't be ignored. The next one is a breather, but it's weirder than it sounds. Instant coffee is real coffee. It was brewed first, fully, and then the water was removed. When you add hot water to instant coffee, you're rehydrating a previous cup. Various patents for the process appeared in the late 1800s. Arts and large-scale production followed in the early 20th century. But the thing that made instant coffee a global habit was war. World War II military rations included it. Soldiers received it in field kits, brought the habit home, and it stuck. 2 methods exist now: spray drying, where hot air blasts liquid coffee into powder, or freeze drying, where it's frozen and the ice is removed under vacuum to preserve more flavor. It still outsells specialty coffee in large parts of the world. Now, the plant itself gets strange. Robusta coffee has roughly twice the caffeine of Arabica. It is not the weaker option, it is the stronger one, but the flavor is harsher and more bitter, which is why it tends to hide in blends rather than standing alone. The name refers to the plant, not the taste. Robusta grows in hotter, lower, wetter conditions, resists disease and pests far better than Arabica, and asks much less of the farmer. Commonly found wild in the Congo Basin region of Central and West Africa, it spread through colonial-era farming into Vietnam and India, and Vietnam became one of the world's largest producers. Most espresso blends contain Robusta for the crema and the caffeine punch. Most instant coffee is made primarily from it. Arabica is the one that gets all the praise, and some of it is deserved. The flavor is cleaner, more complex, more varied. But here's what doesn't get said often enough. Arabica is also fragile. It's disease-prone. It needs specific altitude, specific rainfall, specific temperature ranges. A bad season can wipe out a crop. It grows best on steep slopes that often require hand harvesting because machines can't navigate them. The name comes from its early spread through the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen trade routes, but the plant itself originated in the Ethiopian highlands. Today, it's the foundation of all specialty, single origin, and pour-over coffee culture in the West. If you're at a third-wave cafe, it's Arabica. That dominance just comes with a fragility that climate change is already testing. Almost nobody outside one country knows what Liberica is, and that's strange because it's technically a third species of coffee. The plant grows tall, sometimes dramatically so. The cherry is larger than Arabica or Robusta, and the bean itself is asymmetrical and irregular in a way that looks almost wrong. The flavor is smoky, woody, with a fruity edge that doesn't taste like coffee to most people who try it for the first time. It spread to the Philippines and parts of Southeast Asia during a blight in the late 1800s that wiped out much of the world's Arabica supply, and the Philippines briefly became a significant producer. When Arabica recovered globally, Liberica mostly stayed local. In the Philippines, it's still called Barako, still grown, still consumed. Specialty markets are starting to notice it. And then there's Geisha, or Geisha, the spelling shifted and the confusion spread with it. It has nothing to do with Japanese culture. The variety was found in the Geisha region of Ethiopia and eventually transplanted to Panama in the mid-20th century, where it sat quietly for decades until a competition in the early 2000s made the coffee world stop and take notice. Tasters at that competition reportedly thought something was wrong with their equipment. The flavor was so far outside normal coffee experience, floral, almost like jasmine or bergamot tea, barely recognizable as coffee, that it didn't fit any existing category. Prices for Geisha lots have since reached some of the highest ever recorded at auction. The bean is long and slender compared to standard varieties. It's found now in ultra-premium cafes globally, and it remains genuinely strange to drink. The last one takes all of this and pulls it back to the beginning. In the forests of southwestern Ethiopia, coffee still grows wild. No farms, no irrigation, no planted rows. People walk into the forest and harvest it the same way humans likely did over 1,000 years ago. The Kaffa region, the one from the origin story, the one the word coffee may have come from, is a recognized biodiversity zone where coffee trees grow under forest canopy alongside hundreds of other species. Birds eat the cherries. Monkeys eat the cherries. The forest sustains itself. Most of it is consumed locally or exported in small specialty quantities. The outside world barely knows it exists. Researchers now study it specifically because its genetic diversity might hold the key to breeding more resilient coffee plants for a warming climate. The wild forest where all of this started is still there, still producing, still completely untouched by machines.